Hello and welcome to the edition of Motor Cars Enthusiasts. On this particular program, finally going to get to my review of Ford versus Ferrari, the hit film that's been out for, what, now a little over a month and a half or so. I saw quite a bit of time ago. I told you I was going to do a review, and this finally actually getting that deal done. Now, the trick was with this film is I know the backstory. I know of this story my entire life, so you know what? Trying to get to see it on the big screen was actually a big deal. The other thing was it was going to be interesting to see just how they were going to portray this thing on film. Because, you know, it's not a documentary, so they're going to take some poetic license with it, if you will. I know one of the things once I first started seeing trailers on this deal was the fact that Matt Damon was playing Carroll Shelby, which I knew before the trailers came out, but I thought that they may try to do something to make him look like Carroll Shelby, which he didn't even remotely look like him. I will say this, once I actually got to see him on the big screen in the film itself, I say he absolutely nailed it. There was a little bit of swagger, if you will, from one Carroll Shelby, who I've seen in many an interview and seen many of documentary and whatnot about Mr. Shelby. So the swagger, he was somewhat of a swashbuckler, if you will, and I thought that he killed it. The accent and everything, he didn't sound exactly like Carroll Shelby, but it was so close. The mannerisms, I think that Matt Damon did an amazing job. Another fellow that gets a little nod of the cap was one John Bernthal. Bernthal played Lee Iacocca in this particular film. Lee Iacocca was a lot like Carroll Shelby, somewhat of a swashbuckler, a lot of swagger, even though in the film, he probably made more of an important role, even though he probably didn't actually in real life. That being said, I thought these two actors actually just nailed it. Even though they didn't look anything like their real-life counterparts, they really did a beautiful job of acting. The one that really stunned me, when I first saw a trailer and I first saw Christian Bale, I was blown away. I was like, oh my gosh, that's Ken Miles. I mean, it is amazing how much these two look alike. So, and with kind of a limited story background as far as Ken Miles is concerned, as far as what is filmed of him or known of him in real life, he kind of got a wider berth of actually how he was be able to portray that particular character. The acting in this film is absolutely fantastic. It's stellar. This movie is well screwed together. It's well paced, it's well shot, it's really gorgeous to look at. It does have problems. Obviously, there's a lot of poetic licensing, like we talked about before. There's a lot of things that guarantee didn't happen in real life, especially like you think of the scene when Ferrari was actually trying to be bought by Ford back in the day. That deal, as far as the real deal, the deal with Enzo and his group was pretty real to life. One translator, one lawyer, but there was a huge amount of people that were there, actually at a huge boardroom table, tons of lawyers, and Henry Ford II was actually at that particular meeting, which wasn't actually in the film. That being said, it didn't really take away too much of the film. If you know a little too much about the story, I feel it's probably like people who say that the book was better than the movie itself. One of the big issues is always in the racing deal. You know what? You see two cars racing side by side, and they're side by side long enough that they can look back at each other and stare at each other like a couple of idiots. This doesn't happen in the racing world, maybe in small doses, but nothing like it does in the movie world. And then the most annoying thing, after they glare at each other, give each other the stink eye for a little while, one of them grabs another gear and just kind of moves off into the sunset like you wouldn't already be in that gear to begin with, that you're just pulling up alongside of him because you're just trying to be a jerk. This is something that when you're driving 10-10s, you're not even remotely paying attention to what's going on as far as what's going on around you. You're just trying to get around anything that moves, and you may be fighting with a certain car and know that you're fighting with a certain car, but again, in the racing world, you're really hyper-focused on the racing that is. That's kind of all the really grumpy things I have to say about this movie. Okay, it's got a lot of inaccuracies, a lot of things put together. I was really tickled the way they did the film as far as how much of the story are they going to tell? How much are they going to lop off? And I felt that they did a perfect beginning to end of this movie, especially with the ending part which I kind of didn't think that they were actually going to do, even though I knew the real deal. Even though this thing could have really been called the Ken Miles story, because, you know what, Miles was the real focal point of this. Even though a lot of the interactions with Miles and other people, well, he was kind of a hothead, but maybe not to the extent. But again, it's brought up for Hollywood it's what Hollywood does, so it's not that huge a deal. The real trick is this is still one of the best racing movies ever made. And I'm not just saying that because I am really cynical when it comes to movies. This thing's, like I said, well screwed together, well put together, well paced. It's a little long, but you don't feel it. And there's none of those, oh gosh, what is a huge pet peeve for me? The little parts of a movie. There'll be little scenes in there that have nothing to do to move the story along. You know when people talk about gratuitous nudity? Well, there's a ton of just gratuitous scenes inside of films as is. You'll see a small scene, you'll think, well, that's got to go to somewhere, and then it goes nowhere. In fact, you could have lopped it out of the movie and it would have made a doggone bit of difference. That is something that this film doesn't have, which I was pretty impressed by. The thing is well put together. You care about the characters. It's got happy and sad and funny parts and whatnot. It's a very good film. Chances are you might see it in very limited production as far as in theaters, but if you get a chance to see it, you may be the only one inside of the theater, which is my way, the best way to see a film. In fact, this was the first film I saw in 2019 that there was actually other people in it. Apparently, there's something either wrong with me or I have bad taste in movies, so go out and see Ford versus Ferrari. If you know the story, just kind of, blend in with the background. If you don't know the story, this will definitely show off some of the things that was really big back in the days, back in the mid-60s, with Ford taking on Ferrari back at Le Mans. And that's all there was that I thought was worth talking about for this Just Motor Cars Enthusiast. In fact, this is the last show of 2019. So, you know what? The holidays are coming up. So no matter what holiday you celebrate, if whether you're a fan of Christmas or Hanukkah or Kwanzaa or even Festivus, no matter what you celebrate, I hope you celebrate it with all the people that you love, surrounded by friends and family, and have just the best time, the best holidays you ever had. Merry Christmas from all of us here at Motor Cars Enthusiasts, and we'll see you in 2020.